I'm known as A. Michael Martinez. A stands for Anthony. I never go by that. I go by Mike. We started out as a hippie band from Albuquerque called Lincoln Street Exit, which morphed us into another band called Exit, X-I-T, which was picked up by Motown Records, and we recorded on Rare Earth label in 1971. We were living in the mountains in Cedar Crest, New Mexico, across from Mario's Frontier Town. Motown sent out a couple of producers to look at the band to see if that's what they really wanted on their label. Sure enough, when they saw us, they were very impressed. So we got to working on the music, and they flew us out to Detroit, Michigan, probably about a couple months later. When we got to Detroit, we were encouraged by our manager to be dressed to the nines, wearing our costumes, which was pretty much what we always would wear. Myself, I had long braids, and they were rabbit skin covers on my braids. I had bone chokers, ribbon shirts with silver concho buttons, regular jeans with some maybe leather things hanging off of them. The rest of the band was the same way, if not even more dressed up than I was. When we landed in the Detroit airport, we had a chauffeur from Motown waiting for us. He had a sign, but he didn't really need to show us the sign because he knew exactly who we were. So he just waved and said, "Hey, this way." So we went down to pick up our instruments, which we had to bring to Motown because we had different instruments than what they had. I've always played my own guitar, so I brought my guitar as well as the other musicians brought their instruments. And our drummer, his name is Lee Herrera, played an all-skin Taos drum set in place of a regular trap set. And the other members of the band, Max Fossil on bass and R.C. Garris on guitar. And our manager was the lyricist of the album that we were going to record called Plight of the Red Man. His name is Tom B. And it was produced by Mike Valvano and the Toronto brothers, Ralph and Russ. We proceeded to get our tour the first day we were there of Hitsville, and that's where everybody recorded. It was anybody with Motown. On the way to our hotel from the airport, we went down the main street in Detroit where the riots had burned down most of downtown Detroit. The riot had taken place in '68 on the death of Martin Luther King's day. So that was a culture shock to me. I was a million miles away from New Mexico in my mind. We started the very next day to record the album. They took us to Studio B, is what they called it. On the way into Studio B, we got to meet the Temptations as they were walking out. Each one of them spoke the way they sing on their records. That was an amazing meeting. That night, we had to put down all of the instrumental tracks as much as we could, but it took us a series of maybe 3 or 4 nights to finish all the instrumentals. During those instrumental nights, we also had to put down background vocals and overdub drums and native instruments on the recording. It was kind of interesting because other musicians would come in to view our session because they'd never seen a bunch of Indians recording an album before in Motown. One night, Meatloaf was there in one of the sessions, and he sat and looked at us play and got to talking, and he's a nice fellow, and nice meeting him. We didn't have many days off, but I remember one day we had off. We wanted to get some beer. We were up on the 7th floor of the apartment building that Motown put us in. We were taking the elevator down, and when the door opened, there was this drunk Englishman in the corner with his eyes half closed, and he opened his eyes as we all walked in. There was 5 of us, and we were dressed with all our Indian outfits on, and he exclaimed in a loud voice, which startled me, scared me as much as we scared him. It says, "Oh no, you're not going to scalp me, are you?" We just laughed and chuckled, and our manager said, "No, but we may burn you at the stake." We went down the elevator, and then we went out on the streets, and we were going to go get a case of beer. So we walked down to a corner, turned down the corner, and if anybody's never been to Detroit back in those days, there's lots of people. This was September, lots of people out on the street, and I'm talking about African Americans doing their thing, and they were as astounded to see us as we were astounded to seeing them. I think even more so with us being in their environment. No hassles, no problems, no trouble. They just looked. Some of them gave us nods, some of us winked at us, but they were very cordial, very nice. We went into the liquor store, bought our case, went back up to the hotel room and drank. We got a phone call from the producer, and he said, "Where were you guys?" Told him that we were getting a case of beer, and he said, "Never go out on the streets again while you're here." We finished the album, and then once we were done with the sessions, we were flown back to New Mexico, and the next thing was to do was to go out on the road and promote the album, which lasted for a good year or two. I didn't last a good year or two. I had quit right after that. The pressure that was put on us by the record company to make money for them, and also the radio stations quit playing our music because it was too radical. The government actually put a lien on Motown to quit promoting radical music, radical musicians. That also stopped us from having radio play. We played minor concerts, and we played lots of reservation in the United States. It didn't last too long after that. So thanks to the government, thank you, Mr. Nixon, and that was 1971. We started the album. By 1973, pretty much washed up. AIM adopted us in Dallas, Texas in the summer of '72, when we first met most of the AIM members, Dennis Banks, Russell Means, John Trudell, the Bellecourt brothers, later on Floyd Red Crow Westerman. And they took our music as their anthem for their rallies and their protests. And that was part of why our music was banned by the radio stations, why it was also threatened by the FBI and the government, that we were insurgents and troublemakers and terrorists.